I was talking about one side that says that Matthew, Mark, and Luke did know Jesus is God, and there's specific hallmarks to be able to tell that we know that Jesus is God. Look at what verses am I talking about? Look in Matthew at all of the time at the birth narrative. Look at Matthew at the birth narrative where the people at his birth, the shepherds are coming and worshiping him. The idea of worship is attributed to him by Matthew. What did Matthew think about that? It's also attributed to Matthew and Mark and Luke whenever he calms the storm and all the apostles worship him. There's the implication that they knew. And they're kind of inductively saying, this guy's being worshipped. Do you guys know who he is? I mean, do you get the implications of it right now? So it's in Luke, the soldier at the foot of the cross who says, truly this man was a righteous man, like the other Gospels have, but truly this man was the Son of God. And whenever he says, truly this man was the Son of God, you know, the Son of God does have those implications. What are you going to do with the Son of God? What is the nature that we're talking about? Aren't we all sons of God? So it's kind of, again, inductive, but at the same time deductive. It's this definite statements, definite attributions to Christ as God, but nothing's as definite as John.
Maybe best to say that it's implicit in the synoptics for sure. It's not that it's not there, that Jesus doesn't do deeds that we'd say would point that direction, say things that point that direction, assume an authority. Are you not hearing me? Assume an authority that would take us that direction. But it's just so much more implicit, and we have to wrestle with why. Is Bart Ehrman right when he comes along and says none of the synoptic evangelists, whoever they were, he would say obviously not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but none of the authors, especially of the first three Gospels, thought that Jesus was God and that that's a later development of the church. This isn't a new problem to wrestle with either. I don't know if you mentioned, I wasn't here for your whole presentation, but in the 2nd century, Clement of Alexandria sits down and he writes a little bit about the Gospels, and he says there's something different about John than the rest of the Gospels. The other Gospel writers, and I'm paraphrasing him here, I don't know his exact words, and they'd be in Greek anyway, so, whatever. Yeah. He says the rest of the Gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they sit down and they recorded the physical things that happened. And then he says John came along later, and John understood what those things that he had done in the body meant. And so when John wrote his Gospel, he wasn't just telling us what happened, he was writing, and he uses this phrase, he was writing a spiritual Gospel to tell us its significance. And I think Clement was onto something very, very close to what's going on in the Gospels, and that was AD 200.
Well, do you think that they, as your follow-up says, do you think that they maybe had enough to say that he was God? And I would say, I'd be comfortable saying they had enough to say he was divinity or divine, but they didn't know what that meant and what the relationship, I mean, they barely bring up the Spirit in their Gospels and what the relationship between the three were. And so by the time they wrote that, I don't think they had the things as clear as later on they will be. But again, they just had a piece of the puzzle, a divine, inspired, inerrant piece of the puzzle. Mark is inerrant. Matthew is inerrant. Luke is inerrant. It is perfect. It's the piece that it needs to be, even though it doesn't show completely what it could.
Yeah, I would disagree just a little bit. I'm probably lean that direction just a little bit more. I would definitely say none of the gospel writers have a full understanding. They don't have a Nicene understanding of Jesus' person. And I would probably say that John has a higher understanding. And I think that's very, very true and very evident. I even think the earliest gospel writer, Mark, has a slightly less refined understanding of who Jesus is than Matthew and Luke do. And I think we can see that in the way they write their gospel. But I would still be comfortable saying, yeah, if you have to say, did they toggle the switch? Yeah, they toggled the switch. Well, then why don't they come out and say, Jesus is God? We've got to understand that all of them are writing from and into a culture in which their basic creed is Deuteronomy 6:4. The most important creed to every person that's reading one of those Gospels, maybe Luke accepted because of a partially Gentile audience, but everybody else that's reading this in this culture, all of the guys that are writing, the most important creed they've lived with their whole life is, the Lord our God is one Lord. Monotheism. The most essential element of Jewish thought was monotheism. So they're coming along, and they get convinced and go, okay, yeah, Jesus is God. But in the back of their mind, they're going, wait a minute. There's only one God. The Father's God. And I know what Jesus said, and he was raised from the dead, so we know he was right. And that's kind of how their mind thinks. They start with the resurrection. How do I put that together? And that's where I think the point that I'd say they haven't figured out yet is. Would they confess Jesus' deity? Absolutely. Do they go around saying, Jesus is God? Hey, we believe Jesus is God. Well, no. Why? They've got that hesitation because of their monotheism. And it gives pause, and it takes time for that to work out and for us to figure out, well, wait a minute, how can God be one, and the Father be God, and Jesus be God, and them not be each other? And that's what we mean when we say we're putting the puzzle pieces together. Would they confess Jesus' deity? I think so. I think every one of the gospel writers would. I think John would to a much higher degree than the others. He's had more time to think about it. I think Matthew would more than Mark. He's had an extra 20 years to think about it. Would they be able to understand the relationship the way that we do after Nicaea? I don't know that they'd say that until we presented it to them. Again, I like your analogy. If we shared it with them and they thought about it, I think they'd all come back and go, yeah, that's really good. That's really good. But they hadn't put those pieces together yet. They knew Jesus was God, yes. They knew there was only one God, yes. But they hadn't built it together into what we would call a Trinity yet.
And I don't think we disagree because you said one would believe he's God, but John would believe that he's
you
had
wanted
a
to
much
call him
higher
divinity.
view.
You wanted to
so
call
I
that
say divinity or divine,
Yeah.
and then we're talking about homoousios with the Father, of the same stuff
I didn't say
as the
that.
Father.
I didn't say that.
No, I'm saying that that's how it develops, and that's how it gets stronger and stronger throughout time. And that's what I'd say is we just have a stronger articulation based upon 2,000 years of putting this puzzle together.